I left a note on her pillow that said, "I know everything," then walked out of the house without turning on a single light. It wasn't rage that moved me, just clarity. A clean break between the version of me that trusted her and the version that no longer existed. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted calculation. Silence is harder to recover from than shouting. And when she'd read those 3 words, I wanted her to feel them echoing in every empty corner of our home. I didn't even shut the front door. Just let it rest against the frame like an exhale. The house behind me didn't feel like mine anymore. Not because I was leaving, but because she had already vacated it emotionally, long before I had the courage to do the same. The street outside was cold and quiet, the kind of silence that lets your own heartbeat fill your ears. I walked, not sure where I was going, just away. Away from the lies that dressed themselves as routine. Away from the perfumed air that lingered too long on her side of the bed. Away from the woman who used to send me midday, "I miss you" texts, and now barely looked up from her screen. I hadn't planned to leave the note. It just came to me, a flash of instinct. I tore a sheet from the grocery list on the fridge and wrote it in block letters. I know everything. No name, no accusation. Just the kind of sentence that makes people replay their worst secrets over and over, trying to guess which one finally came to light. I didn't need to spell it out. She'd know. That's the cruel efficiency of guilt. It doesn't need specifics. It attaches itself to whatever you're most afraid of being caught for. I pictured her finding it. Maybe she'd come out of the shower, towel still clutched to her chest, hair damp and clinging to her collarbone. Maybe she'd noticed the dark, quiet hallway, the coat missing from its hook. Maybe she'd call my name once, twice, and then see the note, folded like a breathless confession on her pillow. Would she cry? Laugh? Shrug? I didn't care. Not anymore. Because the truth is, I'd been grieving her for months before that night. The woman I loved had started to disappear in inches. A missed call here, a distant glance there, and then came the little cruelties, the kind that don't leave bruises, just questions. Why did she start locking her phone? Why did she suddenly care so much about how she looked to go grocery shopping? Why did she call me Ryan? My name is Nick, and maybe I could have forgiven it. Maybe, if she had just told me the truth when I asked where she'd been that night, she smelled like pine cologne and guilt. But lies are heavy when repeated. They bend the floorboards, strain the seams. Eventually, the house groans under their weight. Tonight, I stepped outside before it collapsed on top of me. I didn't leave to hurt her. I left to survive her. And as I walked down our street, the one we used to jog down every Sunday morning, hand in hand before brunch, I realized something brutal and beautiful. Some betrayals don't scream. They whisper for years, and I had finally stopped listening. She froze when she saw the second note, slipped under her plate during dinner. I know who he is. She served lasagna that night. Extra basil, slightly overdone on the edges. Her way of pretending everything was fine. The kind of meal that screams familiarity, comfort. But comfort's a funny thing. It doesn't survive a lie. Curdles. Our daughter, oblivious, chattered about her day. Coloring projects. A scraped knee. How the lunch lady gave her 2 cookies instead of 1. I nodded, smiled where I should, but all my attention was on the woman across the table. She had curled her hair. I hadn't seen her do that in months. A detail meant to distract or maybe to reset the board. That's what it felt like. A game. And I was finally playing. She lifted her fork, laughing softly at something our daughter said, and then she saw it. The note was folded neatly, slipped beneath her plate before dinner. I watched as she paused mid-bite, pretending to wipe her mouth with her napkin. Her fingers slid the note out like a magician pulling a card from a stacked deck. She didn't open it right away, just looked at the crease, like the paper itself might accuse her. When she did read it, I know who he is. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not panic, not remorse, a flicker of calculation. Her breath hitched for just a second. Then she blinked slowly, set the note aside, and reached for her water like she hadn't just been handed a loaded weapon. "Mommy, are you okay?" our daughter asked. Her voice was small, concerned. She nodded. "Just tired, sweetheart." But she didn't touch her food again. I kept eating, slowly, purposefully, and I watched. She didn't look at me, not directly, but she did glance toward the hallway once. Toward her phone, probably, wondering if he'd text, wondering what else I knew, wondering if she could still control the narrative. That's the thing about liars. They never confess. They coordinate. And in that moment, she was calculating how much of the truth she could bend without breaking. She chewed her bottom lip, a habit she thought looked innocent, but I knew better. It meant she was thinking, strategizing, choosing which version of the truth to tell first, just in case the others were already burning. It wasn't guilt I was watching for. That would have been almost welcome. No, I was looking for what I used to admire in her. The way she handled emergencies, smoothed over messes, manipulated emotion like it was an instrument she'd mastered. I used to love that about her. Now it made my skin crawl. She cleared the plates after dinner. Silently, gently, as if noise might tip the balance. I let her pretend she still had agency, that she still had control, but the truth was already in motion, and it no longer belonged to her. I stood in the kitchen doorway as she washed the dishes, her back to me, her shoulders tense but deliberate. She was buying time, that was clear, waiting for the right moment to ask a question that wouldn't reveal how much she feared the answer. When she finally did speak, her voice was barely louder than the water from the tap. Is something wrong? I didn't respond. Not right away. I wanted her to sit in it. The uncertainty. The way lies do when they lose oxygen. Because now she knew I didn't just suspect. I knew. Not just what she was hiding, but who she was hiding it for. And that changed everything. She waited until the dishes were done, the child asleep, then called her father. She didn't rush. That's how I knew it mattered. She moved through the evening like a dancer who knew the steps. Dishes scrubbed, toys tucked into bins, our daughter kissed and tucked beneath a pink blanket. A performance of motherhood, domesticity, control. But her fingers trembled just once when she closed the door to the child's room. That's when the mask slipped. Only for a second. Enough to confirm what I'd suspected. She wasn't just scared. She was activating something. I sat in the hallway, out of sight, lights off. My phone open. Not to record her voice, that would be messy, maybe even illegal depending on the state. But the timestamp? That was clean, unassailable. And it told me everything I needed to know. At 9:47 p.m. she called her father. There was no doubt in my mind. She never speaks that quietly to anyone else. And she never uses the living room landline unless she wants to avoid her call log being seen. I didn't need to hear the words to know the play. Her father wasn't the sort of man who offered comfort. He offered outcomes. The kind that come with stipulations and dotted lines. When we got married, he didn't toast to love. He toasted to alliances. I was never a son-in-law to him. Just a variable to control. Now she was trying to leverage that. She thought he could fix this, whatever this meant to her. Maybe he'd call in favors. Draft a settlement in my name. Pressure my job. Or maybe just bury the truth under enough paperwork to outlive the emotion. She still thought this was a negotiation. But what she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that I'd already been 3 steps ahead. Weeks ago, before I slipped that first note onto her pillow, I had retained counsel. Not here. Not in the state where her father's friends wore robes and wielded gavels. Across the border. A different jurisdiction. Different rules. The kind she couldn't manipulate with a dinner invitation or a family name. I had learned to play her game. But I never told her I'd changed the board. She stayed on the phone for 11 minutes. Her voice low, clipped, formal, all the tells of someone narrating a version of events they want remembered. Not the truth. Just a version. I imagined her saying I was unstable. That I threatened her. That she feared for our daughter. She would weaponize concern if it meant staying in control. Because that's who she is when cornered, not a victim, not a villain, just a tactician trying to win a war she never admitted she started. When the call ended, I heard her sit on the couch. The silence after was heavier than the conversation itself. A silence full of tension, not peace. The kind you find in a courtroom before the verdict's read. She thought the battle had just begun. She didn't realize she'd already lost. Not because I had outsmarted her, but because I'd stopped needing her to admit anything. I didn't want an apology. I wanted freedom. And I'd already found the door. We met again, across from each other in court. I came with the prenup. She came with her father's silence. She wore gray. Not black, that would have signaled mourning, too obvious. Not red, too defiant. No, gray was safer. Respectable. Neutral. But even that choice betrayed calculation. She knew eyes would be on her, and she dressed like someone who didn't want to be read at all. But I read her anyway. The courtroom was clinical. Cold, polished wood and thin light. The kind of place that strips everything down to facts, filings, and signatures, no room left for sentiment. Or spin. I didn't smile when she walked in. I didn't look away either. Let her see the cost of performance. Let her remember the night she signed that document barefoot, laughing, still damp from the rain. We just moved into our new home. The ink smudged slightly where she gripped the pen too hard. It's just paperwork, she said. We'll never need it. That's the thing about foresight. It doesn't feel romantic until it's the only thing standing between you and ruin. Now her hand was bare. No wedding ring. No trembling. Just pressure, her fingers digging into the wood of the table like she could hold onto something. Anything. But the table couldn't save her. Her father was there. Third row. Dark suit, unreadable expression. He didn't speak. Not a word. Maybe because he knew there was nothing to say. Or maybe because, for once, silence was the only currency he had left. He tried, of course. Quietly. Behind the scenes. Phone calls that never reached me directly. Offers that came through third parties. But I never negotiated. You don't haggle over betrayal. You survive it. The judge looked at the documents. Just 3 pages. Ironclad. Clean. The prenup wasn't cruel, just clear. In case of infidelity, the estate defaults. Assets revert. Custody reviewed. It wasn't revenge. It was architecture. And I had built it long before the storm. She tried to look calm, but her eyes kept flicking between the judge's hands and mine, as if waiting for one of us to blink. We didn't. The ruling came without drama. Everything to the plaintiff. Nothing to the defendant. Not vindictive. Not loud. Just final. I watched her breathe out like she'd been holding air for weeks. But there was no relief in it. Just realization. Not that she lost, but that there was no appeal. Justice, when done right, doesn't scream. It signs a verdict and goes home. When it was over, she stood but didn't move. Her father touched her shoulder briefly, then let go. Even he knew this wasn't a place for influence. It was a place for consequences. I walked past them without a word. No glance. No gloat. Because this wasn't a victory. It was a burial. Not of her, but of the illusion that love excuses everything. She broke the foundation. I simply read her the blueprint. Her lover was arrested that same evening, wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. I handed the police everything. He was never more than a shadow in her life. A string of initials in her phone. A sudden dentist appointment she didn't remember mentioning. A new fragrance she claimed was from a free sample at work. The kind of man who existed only in gaps, the spaces between what she told me and what I knew. But I don't chase shadows. I document them. He wasn't clever. Just careful enough to fool someone who wasn't watching. But I was. Long before I placed that first note on her pillow, I had noticed patterns. Recurring addresses in her navigation history. An Uber trip that ended nowhere near her office. Meetings that lasted too long on days when she wore heels for lunch with a client. I didn't confront. I recorded. Because anger fades. But evidence doesn't. What I found wasn't just infidelity, it was a blueprint of fraud. The man she trusted with her body was trusting her with stolen accounts. Shell companies. A VPN that couldn't quite mask his signature IP. Her affair wasn't just emotional or physical, it was criminal. She didn't even know. She thought she was in love. He thought she was leverage. Bank statements led to account numbers. Venmo notes turned to contract names. I followed the crumbs until the pile became a dossier. I wasn't building a case to ruin her. I was building certainty. I needed to know what kind of man she would betray me for, and what I found was a parasite. A man who didn't just take hearts, but mortgages. Retirement funds. He had a trail across 3 counties and a history that read like a checklist of federal offenses. And he slipped. A signature on a rental car. A selfie reflected in the glass of a stolen laptop. Nothing big. Just enough. Enough to make my next call feel less like revenge and more like reporting a loose wire sparking near dry leaves. The detective asked for my name twice. I gave it both times. Then I handed over everything. By the time the sirens came for him outside a bistro 2 cities over, I was already home. In the kitchen. Her wine uncorked. A glass waiting on the counter. Not for her. For me. I didn't need to see him cuffed. I'd already watched the real performance, the one where she looked me in the eye after every lie and smiled like it didn't cost her anything. She called later that night, I assumed to ask if I'd heard the news. I didn't answer. Because I already had. He was arrested at 7:38 p.m. She poured herself a glass of red at 7:40. And I knew in that moment she still didn't understand. This wasn't about justice. It was about who stayed standing when the illusion shattered. And I was still standing. I sat alone by the fire, sipping wine I didn't pay for in a house I no longer shared. The glass was full. The fire was warm. The silence deafening. It should have tasted like justice. That was the plan. That was the point, wasn't it? To outmaneuver, to survive, to win. But all I felt was the space between the flames and my skin. Heat nearby. Warmth nowhere. The wine had been hers. A bottle from that overpriced vineyard she used to rave about, earthy, bold, just a hint of violet. She said that every time, like a rehearsed line from a play she never wanted to end. I opened it tonight like a relic. A souvenir from a life I'd closed the curtain on. The house was mine now. Every paper signed, every verdict final. Her lover cuffed. Her father neutered by silence and loss. The accounts were locked. The legal doors shut tight. There was nothing left for her here. And yet here I was, still listening for footsteps that wouldn't come. Still catching myself glancing at the door, half expecting the familiar rustle of her keys. Old habits don't die. They just echo. I'd won. Every box checked. Every advantage calculated and secured. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like inventory. Counting things instead of feeling them. The walls, the furniture, the bank balance, all still here. But the version of me who believed in shared meals and shared futures? Gone. Left behind somewhere between suspicion and strategy. People warned me, don't lose yourself trying to catch someone else falling. But no one tells you what it feels like when you catch them and realize you're falling too. I used to want the truth. Every answer. Every ugly detail. I wanted to corner her in a room of lies and watch her try to explain the mess with that trademark calm, the one she used to fix every social faux pas and family dinner squabble. But somewhere between the first note and the courtroom's closing gavel, that desire turned to dust. Now I didn't want answers. I wanted absence. No more explanations. No more voices in the next room. No more polite lies wearing perfume. Just distance. From her. From the version of myself who let things slide. Who believed that silence meant peace, not detachment. The fire cracked once. Loud. Startling. It was the only sound in the house. And in that flicker of orange light, I caught my reflection in the window, wine in hand, jaw set tight, surrounded by everything I fought to keep. And I barely recognized the man who won. Because cold victory doesn't cheer. It just waits for the warmth that never comes. A week later, an unsigned letter arrived. For words, now I know everything. No envelope can ever prepare you for the weight inside. It came without ceremony, tucked between bills and coupons. I almost missed it. Cream paper, no name, no return address. Just my own written in block letters. Not typed. Not printed. Personal. I opened it like you'd open an old wound, slowly, knowing it would sting. For words stared back at me. Now I know everything. That was it. No signature. No date. No context. But the handwriting? Hers. I'd spent years watching that script. Grocery lists. Thank you notes. Little messages in lunchboxes for our daughter. Slanted left when she was tired. Sharp when she was angry. This was both. The irony hit hard. She had returned my message, not in a call, not in court, not through lawyers or outbursts. Just this. A quiet reversal. A mirror. Her original note had been silence. Mine had been certainty. This was something else entirely. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we used to plan vacations and argue over light fixtures. The paper trembled slightly in my hand. Not from fear. From questions. What did she know? Had someone talked? Had she traced the arrest, followed the trail, found the breadcrumb I forgot to hide? Had she realized it wasn't just his crimes I uncovered, but hers, too? The offshore transfer from her private account. The second phone. The lawyer she consulted 2 months before I left that first note. Had she pieced it all together? Or maybe she meant something deeper. Maybe it wasn't about the evidence anymore. Maybe it was about me, what I had become. The man who used to bring her tea in bed had turned into someone who monitored her GPS data with surgical calm. Someone who could sit beside her at dinner knowing what he knew and smile. Maybe that's what she saw now. Not the man she betrayed, but the man she created. I stared at the letter long after it stopped meaning anything. The ink blurred slightly under my thumb, not from tears, just pressure. Because no matter how many games you win, there's always another move. And now she'd made hers. Not a threat. Not a plea. Just presence. She knew. And that changed everything again. Because knowledge isn't static. It's a weapon, but it cuts both ways. And the moment she stopped running, she became dangerous again. I called the lawyer. Is there any chance? She's suing me? He paused. Not long. barely a breath. But in that fraction of a second, everything shifted. Lawyers don't hesitate when the answer is no. I felt the air thin in my chest as he cleared his throat, trying to cushion it. There's been a motion, he said carefully, filed overseas. Unusual jurisdiction. That told me everything and nothing. Somewhere I hadn't looked. Somewhere I'd underestimated. She had moved. Not physically, strategically. While I was pouring wine and savoring silence, she was calculating her next act. Now I know everything. That wasn't closure. That was positioning. She hadn't disappeared. She had repositioned. And this was her opening move in a new game I didn't even know we were playing. My mind raced through scenarios. What had I missed? What loophole had I left open? A joint asset I forgot to dissolve? A trust in our daughter's name with unclear custodianship? I had been so careful, so sure. But I'd been playing defense for so long, I forgot what offense looked like. She hadn't broken. She'd evolved. I used to be 3 steps ahead. Now I was asking questions, playing catch-up. I was no longer the architect. I was the occupant watching the floor shift beneath me. And that was her victory, because it didn't matter if she won this round or not. She had changed the tempo, forced me to react. The one thing she never managed when we were together, she had now done from a distance. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Where was the filing? I asked. Another pause. Liechtenstein, he said. I laughed. A bitter, breathless sound. Of course. A private foundation we joked about setting up, long before betrayal had entered the room. A hypothetical for tax reasons. A name I had scribbled in a notebook. She remembered. She remembered everything. And now she was using it. That's what frightened me the most. Not the filing. Not the lawsuit. But the realization that I hadn't been fighting a woman in mourning. I had been playing against someone who studied the war even as she lost the battle. And now she was playing again. Quietly. Smartly. Like I used to. I hung up and sat in the dark. The glow of the phone screen still fresh in my vision. There were no sirens this time. No judges. No arrests. Just shadows moving in new directions. She wasn't coming for revenge. She was coming for relevance. And if I wasn't careful, she'd get it. This wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. And both of us had learned from each other. She didn't need to come back. She already had. Not through the door, not through apology, but through maneuver. She didn't chase me. She cornered me. Quietly. Strategically. She waited until the dust had settled. Until I had declared myself the winner. Until I had poured the wine and framed my solitude as victory. Then she made her move. A single filing. A foreign court. A whisper of intent that echoed louder than any courtroom verdict ever could. Not to reclaim me. Not to undo the past. But to remind me she was still on the board. And I realized then this wasn't about love. Not anymore. It wasn't about betrayal either. That wound had scabbed over, left a scar I no longer checked. No, this had become something else entirely. A cold, quiet kind of war. The kind fought in file cabinets and strategic silences. I wasn't angry. I was impressed. She had adapted faster than I expected. For months, I'd believed I had the upper hand because I struck first. But she didn't need to strike first. She only needed to strike next. And she had. Beautifully. I used to think I was the strategist. The one who turned emotion into leverage. But she'd learned. She'd watched. While I built my case, she built a playbook. And now we were both reading from it. She was no longer the woman I had married. All warmth, charm, and fragile confidence. That woman was gone. And truthfully, so was the man she had outsmarted. We had shaped each other through cruelty, through silence, through survival. She thought love was armor. I showed her it was a liability. I thought truth was power. She taught me that timing was stronger. Now we fought with different weapons. No shouting. No blame. Just evidence. Memory. Legal precedent. The slow, meticulous tightening of the noose, each around the other's next move. It was chess. And somewhere between filing cabinets and custody clauses, she had claimed a piece I thought I'd buried long ago. our daughter's educational trust. One clause, one signature, one oversight from years back, before the prenup, before the affair, had given her grounds to reopen the game. And I hadn't seen it coming. The letter made sense now. Now I know everything. Not just about me, about the system, about the back doors I thought were mine alone. She didn't burn the house down. She just found a door I forgot to lock. And I saw it clearly now. This was no longer about winning. It was about not losing. Because the truth is, once love dies and revenge quiets down, all that remains is self-preservation. And we were both still alive. Still playing. The war wasn't over. It had just evolved. And maybe so had we. I changed my number, my name, my country. And still, I checked the mailbox twice. I don't expect letters anymore. But I still listen for them. The soft scrape of envelope against wood. The sound of quiet trespass. It's ridiculous, I know. Paranoid, maybe. But some habits outlive logic, especially the ones forged in the space between survival and regret. I changed everything. The phone number was first, then the email, then the address, a different continent even. A place where my name means nothing. Where her father's reach ends at the shoreline and the only chord I answer to is the one inside my head. And still, I checked the mailbox twice. She hasn't written again. Not a word. Not even a ripple in the legal currents. But silence, real silence, doesn't hum like this. This silence has weight, shape, intention. It's not absence. It's waiting. And I've learned the hard way that not all vengeance arrives with a return address. Sometimes it comes as a memory triggered by the wrong scent in a cafe. A child's laugh that echoes like our daughter's once did. A file you thought was deleted, appearing again in a different folder. This was never just a breakup. It was a collision between architects. I don't miss her. Not her touch. Not her voice. Not the way she folded towels wrong but claimed it was more absorbent. That person, that woman I built a life around, vanished long before the courtroom, long before the notes. She was gone the moment I stopped being a husband and became a threat. What I miss is the version of me who thought battles could be won cleanly. Who thought the law could be a sword instead of a scalpel. Who thought you could come out the other side of betrayal untouched, even triumphant. I know better now. Justice and closure rarely hold hands. Sometimes justice feels like a locked door. Sometimes closure is just exhaustion. And what they don't tell you, not in books, not in films, not in support groups, is that even when you win, you keep playing. Because the board doesn't disappear when you walk away. Not when the other player learned from your every move. Not when silence is just her newest strategy. The rules are gone. Shattered. What remains are instincts. Two survivors circling a game that neither one of us will admit is still going. But I know she hasn't left. Not really. And that's why every evening I walk to the mailbox. Once to collect. Twice to make sure I'm not forgetting what game I'm in. Because in games like these, it's not the king or queen who wins. It's the one who never stops moving.